So I'm going to call the Boston Region MPO's TIP project cost ad hoc committee meeting to order. And I'm going to read this accessibility statement. This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: web content accessibility guideline 2.1 level AA standards and revised section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Roisin Foley, MPO staff, at rfoley@ctps.org, or you can call her at 857-702-3704. All participants should join this meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. To participate in the discussion, please select the raised hand function. You can find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raised hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. And then we will call on you. And if you're on the phone, you can use the *9 function to raise your hand. And again, if you're having any difficulties, contact Roisin Foley at rfoley, Foley, at ctps.org, or you can call her at 857-702-3704. So let's call the roll. I'm here. Is John Romano here?
John Romano is here.
Thank you. And I know Brian Kane's here. Is Len
Here.
Diggins here? Is Len here?
Sorry, I'm here.
Great, we got
I'm here.
Len. Is Jim
Yes.
Fitzgerald here? Doesn't sound like it. Is Jay Monty?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. Peter Pelletier? No. Tom Bent?
Eric, this is Brad Rawson for City of Somerville, covering
Oh,
for Tom Bent. He sends
yes.
his regards.
That's right, Brad. Tom said that. So at the UPWP meeting. Thank you, Brad, for joining us. And is Jennifer Constable here? Not hearing it. So the second thing on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone that would like to make public comment? Raise your hand. I'm not seeing anyone.
I would like to make a comment. I'm not sure about the hand feature. This is
Oh.
Catherine Bowen. Sorry about that.
Sure, go ahead. What is your name?
So this is Catherine Bowen. I am a Belmont resident serving in various capacities, school committee, town meeting, and on the community path committee. I'm representing my own opinions here. My question, comment is, I wondered if you could speak to a little bit more about the process, and hopefully I'm raising something that hasn't already been covered, but I recognize the policy recommendations, and I wondered how, when a project is identified as having a cost overrun, where in the process you might, identify why that project is having an overrun and turn that back towards improving practices so that, I'm imagining that all stakeholders would want to be aware of those kinds of situations if it may benefit other projects. So I'm kind of wondering, hopefully that question makes sense, where that information will turn into improving the processes and best practices for all project holders.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, maybe I can start with it, and then Matt, if you want to. I think that our first step here is that we want projects to be a little bit further along in the design process, so we have a better estimate up front of what the cost is as we program it. But then, as it sort of works its way along, from just about that 25% design level towards 75% and then 100%. As we find out that costs have gone up, we will then want the project proponent and the municipality and their firm to come in and actually talk to us a little bit about why the project went up and what did they think that was related to. Is it, is it because the project has changed or other elements have been added, or is it sort of just a general trend across sort of all projects that materials are going up or things like that? Like, and then from there we can better understand, what was the reason for it, what we can do about it, and yeah, does that mean, did we get something wrong up front in the project estimating, and is there, is that a trend that then can kind of inform kind of best practices writ large, or is it unique to that project? And then on the kind of the back end on what do we then do when a project goes up in cost? Do we commit to it and just fund that increase, or do we sometimes we can't and we have to actually like push it out a year because of the way that our funding is allowed in kind of annual time bands? We then use we have a sort of a criteria that we're going to be developing to then identify which projects we feel like have sort of the highest sort of like cost benefit related to that cost increase, and then which ones we would use that information and then to decide what we end up doing with those projects. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yes, thank you. It sounds like some of what you're going to be learning, you may decide how best to move forward on it with the new rubric. So I also just want to say I really appreciate listening to these meetings and the deliberations you've had. It's been really educational, and I've been very impressed with the committee's work. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny, like as I've been doing this over the summer, I've been having a home project on my kitchen, and the project keeps going up in cost. I keep telling the contractor, wait, what's going on here? You gave me an estimate. And he's like, well, we didn't know we'd have to do, we found this when we opened up the wall. So I feel like there's a real, I don't know, an analogy to my own life here. But that is one of the challenges, is that, we're programming these projects when they're at a level of design that is, not full. And that's the conundrum here about how to do that. Len.
Yes, and maybe Matt will speak to this. Let's answer a question as to when we will address them. We're going to have a semi-annual process in place for checking in with the components of the project. And I would imagine as soon as we hit one of those triggers, either 10% or 2.5 million, that will have engender conversation between the proponents and the board. And then from that conversation, we will start making decisions about how to do the programming of the project on the tip. Is that understanding, Mr. Barrasso?
Yeah, no, there will be, yeah, right. There'll be an opportunity for those annual check-ins that that way staff are more informed about the status of projects, which right now is something we learned is not as robust as it could be. So are there any other comments, public comments? Not seeing any. Why don't we go to the third agenda item, Matt? And I think that's you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So I guess right now we have two sets of meeting minutes that have been posted for your review from both July 29th and August 19th, 2021 meetings of this committee. So I think, we'll, I guess, probably take votes to approve the minutes sort of in order. So I guess, if we want to start with a motion and second on the July 29th minutes, take a vote and then move to the August 19th minutes.
Okay. Can I get a motion for the July 19th meeting minutes? Brian Kane?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
And can I get a second? John?
Sorry, I'll second that.
Okay. So we have to do a roll. do I do that? Let me bring up my,
I can do it if that helps.
yeah, if you could, Jonathan, that'd be great.
Sure. Eric Barassa,
Yes.
John Romano,
Yes.
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Yes.
Jay Monty,
Yes.
Brad Rossin.
Why don't I abstain, folks, since Tom was here, but I was not.
Okay, that sounds good. That motion passed.
Vote pass.
Can I get a motion for the August 19th meeting minutes?
Come on, Brian.
the motion.
Fall asleep on it.
Brian Kane makes a motion. Can I get a second, John Romano?
Yes.
Okay, and yeah, John, can you call the roll?
Sure. Eric Barassa,
Yes.
John Romano, I think I heard yes.
Yes.
Okay. Brian Kane,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Yes.
Jay Monty,
Yes.
and Brad Rossin.
My apologies. Jim Fitzgerald is also here.
Oh, great.
Oh, oh.
And Jim has come. Jim, do you want to vote on that?
Yeah, sorry, guys. I know I missed the last couple meetings, so I wasn't sure if I got kicked off the subcommittee, which would have been fair. But yeah, sure. Yes, I will vote to say yes and support.
Okay, great. So that motion passes as well. Thank you all. So yeah, Matt, do you want to go down to agenda 4 and talk about the public comments? I am actually very curious to see what we've received.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Just get set up here. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for having me back and for making the time for another committee meeting. Today, I'm here to discuss the public comments that were submitted over the last few weeks on the draft TIP project cost policies. So I want to start with a summary of the outreach process that was conducted by MPO staff. So as a reminder, the MPO board voted at its meeting on September 23rd to release the proposed policies for public comment. 21-day public review period began the following week on September 28th and concluded earlier this week on Monday, October 18th. MPO staff used a variety of methods to disseminate the proposals to stakeholders throughout the region. Staff created a fact sheet that explained the overall committee process and the resulting recommendations, which functioned as a more digestible and legible version of the policy memo that was endorsed by this committee. Staff sent a number of emails to the MPO's contacts, including messages to the full MPO email list, as well as more curated email lists for both municipal TIP contacts and municipal chief elected officials. The goal here was to really target the proposals to those who would be most directly impacted by the changes. Staff also posted the fact sheet to the MPO's social media channels. Virtual engagement was done through a dedicated TIP policy open house on October 14th, as well as to municipal officials at sub-regional meetings over the last couple of weeks for subregions of Magic, Trick, and the Inner Core. So in total, there were 3 formal written comments submitted on the policy proposals. 2 comments came from abutters to the proposed Belmont Community Path, while another came from a member of the Belmont School Committee who's also in this meeting today, so thank you for being here. And I believe Roisin just posted the comments in the chat. If you all haven't taken a look at them, I would encourage you to go ahead and pull those up for reference. So the full text of those written comments, again, is available for your review. And as a reminder, just on the Belmont Community Path, since that's where we got some of the written comments from, that's a project that has been considered for funding by the MPO in past TIP cycles, but which has not yet been funded by the MPO. Several additional informal comments were also made at the open house and directly to MPO staff. That's over and above the 3 written comments that were submitted. And these additional comments came from municipal staff, MassDOT staff, and members of the consultant community. So what did the feedback look like overall? Generally, most of the feedback we got on the proposed policy changes was overwhelmingly positive, which is very exciting to hear. Several commenters noted their support for the work and goals of the committee. There was definitely broad excitement that the MPO is tackling the issue of project cost increases and is doing so in a way that is engaging, transparent, and data-driven. We also heard a lot of enthusiasm around the recommendations for increased communication across all TIP stakeholders. There seems to be a general sense that there's room for improvement here, and commenters were in agreement that more communication could help close some of the information gaps that have been identified in committee discussions throughout the summer. There's also interest from multiple commenters in seeing a greater level of project oversight. This oversight can help to proactively identify and manage cost and schedule issues, and can also provide an avenue for the MPO to further ensure its goals are being met through the projects it funds. Finally, there was also a lot of support for increasing the guidance that MPO staff provide to project proponents and consultants, which is of course a central part of the recommendations that have been advanced by this committee. In addition to those supportive comments, there were a handful of concerns expressed by some of the commenters. There was support for creating clear project benchmarks, meaning setting desired milestones for projects to hit each year as they proceed through the MassDOT design process. In doing that, however, we need to be sure that those benchmarks reflect the realities on the ground here in the Boston region. In other words, there are some concerns expressed that we don't set benchmarks that are not practically attainable for project proponents. We also heard some concern that setting a 25% design submission as the funding threshold may deter municipalities from pursuing TIP funding for their projects. This is something we talked about quite a bit throughout prior committee meetings, and efforts to mitigate that effect are included in the proposal, including the offer to score projects anytime after approval by MassDOT's Project Review Committee. So this is a way to help municipalities understand the way their projects will perform relative to their peers in consideration for the TIP before they've actually invested in those municipal resources in getting to a 25% design submission. And then finally, we heard that there is support for introducing cost effectiveness measures into the project selection process, but that in doing this methodology for plotting projects, in doing this, the methodology for plotting projects on the cost effectiveness matrix must be clear and well communicated to all stakeholders. The public comments also included a handful of requests for the MPO's work going forward. These include that the MPO board and committee meetings continue to be accessible virtually, as this allowed for unprecedented insight into the committee's policy setting deliberations throughout the summer. It was also requested that the MPO's enthusiasm for addressing cost increase issues not limit the consideration of projects that are high quality, but necessarily expensive because of their overall scope or purpose. And finally, there was a request to further endeavor to create transparency around the inputs for project cost estimates, including soft costs like contingencies. And again, this is very much something that will be an emphasis of the policies going forward, and something that will certainly show up in future guidance related to project costs. So sort of in summary here, there are at least 3 key takeaways from the public comments that we received on the policy proposals. The first is that there's general agreement that the status quo isn't really serving anyone's best interests. And so the committee's work to tackle the cost increase problem head on is important, necessary, and right. The second is that the proposed policy changes seem to align well with the needs of the MPO and the region. Again, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and we did not receive significant pushback from any stakeholders on the proposals. There's general agreement that the proposals are a step in the right direction towards the MPO control project costs, which should support the board in funding more projects while creating a more rational and predictable process for project proponents. And third, as you heard from some of the concerns and requests expressed in the public comments, the finer details of how these policies are implemented will really be key to their success. These details will very much become a focus of MPO staff in the coming weeks and months. And of course, your continued feedback on this front is always more than welcome. So before we move into a discussion, I want to briefly touch on sort of where we're going from here in this process, since we are winding down work a little bit. So we've already begun initial outreach to project proponents to lay the groundwork for the next TIP cycle, a process that will continue throughout the remainder of October and into November. That includes hosting some TIP how-to sessions and one-on-one office hours with prospective project proponents between now and the first week in November. We'll use these forums as opportunities to continue to highlight these policy proposals, offering proponents the chance to continue to ask us questions and provide feedback. On November 4th, we'll look for a final vote from the full MPO board on the policy proposals, after which these new policies would formally take effect. And then from there, the regular TIP process will continue into the winter, with project applications due in mid-December and the project scoring process commencing at that time. So as we wind down work with the TIP ad hoc committee, I want to propose just a couple of questions for us to think about during today's discussion. The first is, sort of a broad question here, but do you have any final thoughts, questions, or concerns on the proposed recommendations before they're considered for a final vote by the MPO on November 4th? And, sort of a follow-on from that, are there any changes you would like to see in the policies before then? And then second, should there be a standing TIP committee to consider projects and policies in the future? I know this is a topic that's been raised at various points, both at this committee's meetings and in the broader MPO meetings. In the past, suggestions have been made that such a standing committee could help vet TIP project scoring results or could discuss project cost increases in a more focused manner than would normally happen at a full board meeting. So this is not a question that we necessarily have to answer today, but just as we're thinking about winding down work as a committee, wanted to sort of pose this on the horizon as a potential next step for consideration. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to the chair for a discussion, and I can leave these questions up as we get started.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Why don't we see what people's thoughts are? But Matt, but actually, before we do that, can I just confirm we only got 3 comments? Is that correct? Okay,
Yeah,
so we didn't.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so we got 3 comments.
Yeah, there were 3 formal written comments, and then there were some verbal comments submitted through the open house and just sort of directly
Okay.
to staff.
Okay. And I noticed we didn't get a ton for the public participation plan either, right? Yeah, it was,
Yeah,
it was-
we also
pretty
We
had.
got 3.
we got 3. But when we did the tip back in June, I felt like we had 100 comments or something like that. We had a lot then, right?
90 of them were on one project.
Yeah, I know. It's just, I know this Belmont project is,
Yeah.
and these 2 2 trails and the Swampscott one are, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely been a discrepancy. I think we actually ended up with about 1,000 comments on the tip last year.
It was that many. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot, but
Okay.
so I think that was sort of exceptional, really driven by those 2 projects. But,
Right. But I remember there were a lot, but yeah, Rasheen, do you have input into this?
Yeah, I just want to know we don't actually have a public outreach coordinator on staff right now, so that might be part of why it's been tough to run public comment periods the last couple of months. Just staff capacity is not totally
Okay.
there. And also, I think the impetus to support the projects that you want in your community is maybe a little stronger than commenting on a policy that may or may not affect that project at some
Yeah.
point in the future.
Yeah,
So,
no, I agree with that. I think you're right there. Yeah, I was kind of hopeful that we would get more input, and that we would use this process also to sort of, in some ways educate people about what this just change might be and what the implications will be. But I think it just means we need to do that in the tip development, outreach. We have to do a really good job of that, and all those upcoming UPWP and sub-regional meetings talk about it there as well. But yeah, John Romano.
The other doing?
Oh, John put his hand down.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted.
Okay.
So, based on the, feedback we got when we presented this to the full board, and presumably they went back and talked to their municipalities and their contacts who this affects the most, right? And we did not get any negative feedback that way. It seemed like, all the feedback through all of the board members and their contacts have been positive. So I don't see, a reason to not bring this forward to the next meeting.
Oh, yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. I guess, yeah, no, I think to Matt's questions here, do folks have any final kind of thoughts, questions, or concerns about these recommendations? Len Diggins?
Yeah, thank you. Eric, so the one comment that was made by the advisory council, and I brought it up at the open house, is the tiers. When we look at the cost benefit analysis chart, and there are two tiers that are labeled tier 2, meaning the one where there is high cost, high benefits, and the one where there's low cost, low benefits. And the feeling is that those are qualitatively different, although we understand why they could be clumped together as tier 2. And so the question or the request is whether we can just make each quadrant a different tier.
So I think, I feel like the actual detailed methodology for doing this analysis is still to be determined.
Oh.
I feel like what we're approving in this policy is kind of the framework for that, but like exactly how we kind of do that will be a further discussion. I think when projects go up in cost and kind of what are the various ways that we're looking at it.
I got you.
I feel like we don't have to like get it all perfect like now and then say like, oh, we'll never touch that methodology again because we've made all those decisions. I feel like that can still be a work in progress. Do you agree with that, Matt?
I mean, I definitely, and this sort of touches on Catherine's question early at the start of the meeting, is that, really this is like a sort of a starting point for setting a new baseline of expectations. And then from there, we can see how they perform and continue to iterate and, as Eric noted, sort of expand upon the details of the methodologies going forward. So, yeah, so I mean, from the staff perspective, and we definitely want your continued input on how you think things are working and, further changes we should make, all that kind of stuff. Because I do think that, these will be evolving as we roll them out. But I think, really, as Eric noted, sort of the hope right now is to just establish that new baseline and then continue to sort of fine tune from there.
Gotcha. So that then also involves where we set the values for the horizontal line in terms of the scores and the vertical line in terms of the cost. So then staff is going to determine those first values when we do the next cycle.
Yeah, so essentially the way that I envision this working is that, staff would take the guidance outlined in this, policy proposal and then continue to build it out into, guidance for proponents and, then actually, implement these policies throughout the winter and spring as we consider new projects. And so, just like every year when staff are presenting project scores to the MPO. I mean, the MPO can always provide feedback on the way that information is organized or laid out. And then, staff can always take that feedback and revise materials for the next iteration. But, I think there is, and so you can provide that feedback to, directly to staff sort of any time between now and when, we would actually use something like the 4-quadrant model. If you have thoughts on how the information should be organized, because that, that feedback is welcome at any point.
And just one more point, because the chair brought this up at the last time we discussed this, and he left us on a question that regardless of how much a project costs in quadrant 2, points really weren't going to move out of quadrant 2. And so I think we might end up with a bit of a discussion when we present this to the full board again, about where we set especially that score line, and is it that we do? I mean, I'm all for this clearly, but I think I guess I don't know where we're giving you guidance initially for setting those values, and so I mean, we're giving you guidance to set the values, but we're not giving you guidance as to how to set the values, and that's really going to determine where projects fall out with respect to those quadrants. So at what point do we give you guidance on that?
Yeah, so that, I mean, that could happen anytime, you know, I mean, as I think we talked about in a past meeting, those initial values were just the medians for each value of the sample. And, you know, if there's a different threshold or cutoff or, you know, value setting strategy that you'd like us to use, I mean, we can certainly like test something out, see how it looks. You know, we're happy to do that sort of whenever.
That's great. It's great. And those are median values, and I had either not paid attention to that or didn't realize that. So thank you. Thanks for answering my questions.
Are there any other final sort of thoughts or concerns with this? I mean, I get a sense, you know, that we've got a lot of support for it. Not seeing any other. What about people's thoughts about having some type of a tip, committee? My feeling has always been that it could be useful to have some type of a committee where you sort of have more detail about the projects. But if at the end of the day, every NPO member is going to want to be on that committee, then it doesn't, it's kind of pointless. The purpose of the committee is to have a smaller group of people that can kind of devote more time, go deeper, and then kind of bring details and bring recommendations back. But if at the end of the day, all the members are going to want to kind of hear those things or be part of it, that's always been my feeling, kind of in the tensions that. But I'd love to hear what other folks think. Brian Kane.
I agree with you, Eric. I think when it comes to these projects, the process we have is the process we're going to have. And I just don't see a committee short-circuiting that enough to really make it be worth our while.
Len?
Yeah, I hear you, man. I think what this begs the question, though, is whether or not we then have more meetings, you know, so that we can spend more time dealing with projects and and policies, rather than trying to, stuff it into a meeting that's like 2.5 hours already. Whether or not we'll just need to just say, okay, we're gonna have more meetings, and they'll be shorter, but at least one meeting per unit time, maybe that's a month or whatever, will be devoted to projects and policies. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah. Tegan?
Thanks. I try not to weigh in too much, because I really do think this is your conversation. I think I'd like to just suggest that you think about how the discussion has unfolded in this forum versus how the discussion typically unfolds in the full board forum, and also take that into consideration. I do think it's important to think about, if we are going to be continuing in virtual formats to some degree or another, the committees may not be exactly the same as the full board, or you may just find that the size of these meetings is different. So I think it's worth thinking about that in addition to what you've already brought up.
No, Tegan, that's a great point. I mean, I think you can absolutely go deeper with a small, with sort of a smaller group of people, and but and probably meet more too. It's probably a combination of both. No, I think it's an important consideration. I've also felt that one thing we lack at the NPO, and maybe this is getting beyond this topic, but we've been in the past 5, 6, 7 years, we get a very high level presentation of what the project is, but we tend not to have a deeper conversation about sort of some of the design elements of the project and what the project is actually kind of accomplishing, and whether we as a group want to try to influence some of the design elements. And that's obviously something that I think is challenging to do kind of in a bigger group, where you feel a more of a sense of a time constraint, as opposed to a smaller group where you might feel like, oh, we have more time here to kind of dig in a little bit ask the question of, well, what, why don't you have a separated, bicycle facility, here, or what, why aren't you doing this, or, et cetera, and go a little deeper there. Right, Brian, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I did, Eric. I was going to just say, the only value that I sort of can see to a committee is if the full board will actually designate some of its decision-making authority to it. And I just don't see that happening.
Yeah.
If we could somehow have all the public comments come to a committee and not the full board, we could save an hour during the TIP process. But I just don't see that as being realistic at this point. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to just sort of muddle through.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you. I think having the TIP committee to consider policies maybe and an as needed basis kind of makes sense for sure. Because I think this was a good process, and I think we made good decisions here. I think, as everyone's saying, as a first step for reviewing and prioritizing projects, I think that's really kind of the heart of the MPO's work. Just wondering out loud whether or not, this committee could be something that, and those instances you're talking about, Eric, where, maybe the MPO would defer a few projects to us to take a deeper dive on and then report back. I don't know if that makes sense, or kind of up to the MPO whether or not they kind of want this committee to take that deeper dive and then report back. I don't know if that might be an option.
Yeah.
We call it the hard decisions committee.
The hard decisions.
Like they can defer it to this committee, like, all right, yeah, let's ask this committee to take a deeper dive on some of these project details. Maybe leave it. I have it that sort of set up.
I mean, we are going to have a discussion at some point about sort of creating a more specific, operations plan for the MPO. And I think being clear about some of the various roles. And so I think there will be an opportunity for the MPO to talk about like the role of committees. And this might be kind of a teaser conversation for something, longer, but no, I think it's all very,
I got
it's all very interesting. Yeah.
I got that thought from the way we do our Boston Civic Design Committee, is that, the full committee hears and sees every project, but some of them are very large or complex or important, and they'll defer it to a committee. And that kind of committee does what kind of takes that deeper dive and then reports back. So that's kind of what popped in my head. But.
That's okay. That's interesting. John Romano.
Should there, whether it's us or somebody else, should there be a cost overrun? I know we looked at cost overruns, but there should be a cost overrun committee so that if a project gets flagged for a cost overrun, that having 35 people then the deep dive on the cost overrun is probably not going to work, right? Maybe when the municipality and the consultant gets called to the table, it should be to the smaller group so that you could do the deep dive on what's going on, where's the problem, what's the cost overrun. And then you could doing that with a small committee will work a lot better than bringing them to the whole thing. Then once we identify where the problems are, then we could invite them or bring the findings with that municipality to the bigger group. Because if you want to dissect it, you're not going to do it with 35 people. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that could be the forum too, to sort of talk about what are the different ways of evaluating the projects too, and does it make sense? I know Ken at Federal Highway is very interested in sort of doing that like cost per mile analysis. If you have corridor projects that are apples to apples, that makes a lot of sense to do a cost per mile. But if you have kind of intersection projects, that that might not make sense. But yeah, that could be the forum for trying to evaluate them against each other and things like that. That's a really interesting idea. Len Diggins.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I was going to say what John had said, because Dan Amson has adjusted that when we have a project cost overrun, that we have a smaller group that looks into that, and it could be consists of members that are interested, and probably those would be people who know the area, and MassDOT folks. So I very much support that. When it comes to the cost benefit analysis, yes, we could be a smaller group that explores that, but that's definitely something that we'll want to bring before the big committee, for a discussion with the full committee. So that's it. Thanks.
Yep, Steve Olenoff.
Yeah, it sounds like any committee you have, you don't want it to make any decisions or narrow down choices. What you want to do is have it investigate and go through all the details and then summarize the details and summarize the choices that you have. Not making any decisions, but just do the work of weeding out the massive details into something that's easy to present to the whole MPO.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, Matt, what did you have in mind for this discussion? Just sort of think about, some of these ideas for further discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was helpful just getting a general sense of folks' thoughts on this question. Like I said, there's not like any urgent decision-making timeline on this. And as you noted, we do have the operations plan work that'll be coming up where I'm sure this topic will be gone into in much more detail. But, this is just sort of something that's come up a couple times, as Len noted. I think Daniel Amstutz has brought it up at least one occasion. I think it's come up in these meetings. So I just want to sort of, take the temperature. And I think this accomplished that, and if there is interest among committee members and, delegating some level of work to a committee going forward, then, at the staff level, we could continue to think about what that looks like and like when that would take effect and all those sorts of things.
Well, I'll make sure that I bring this to the chair when we talk about the agenda for the November 4th meeting and having this as an approval, because I mean, again, we have to see what the project cost situation is, and then if there's a lot of projects, we could create another committee ad hoc committee to kind of do that, and I'll let him know that we had this conversation, and this could be a place to kind of flesh out some of those issues. And I agree with Steve. I don't think it's a group that's making any final determinations, but it's getting the details and then being efficient with the big group's time in kind of going through it all. Jim, did you have any additional comments to make?
No, sorry, I should have
that's fine.
unraised my hand.
Great. So unless there's anything else, I'm going to go to members items. Any members items? Okay, not seeing anything.
Sorry, actually, can I jump in with one?
Did I jump ahead?
No, not at all. This is actually sort of a, late breaking, but actually during this conversation, just got a comment via email on the policy proposals that raised this is from a municipal representative that raised the question of whether or not projects that are close to 25%, but not quite at submission could, still be considered. And I mean, I think we've sort of made a decision on that as a committee, but wanted to posit that, one municipality in the region has raised that as something to consider.
Well, no, absolutely. We said we would consider that. And what I'm anticipating is that we, at least for this first go around, we might not actually have all the projects at that 25% submittal level. And so we're going to have to, get a sense from MassDOT. Have they had that pre-meeting? Have they had that conversation? Where are they at? So there's, this is much more qualitative than it is like quantitative, like, oh, you've done, this thing. There's definitely gray area here without a doubt. So, that's why we said at the beginning, this is not like a hard written in stone policy, but we're trying to be clear that we want to see projects more towards 25% design so that we can have a better sense of what that cost estimate is up front. But there's probably a chance that we'll have a lot of projects that haven't met that threshold yet, and we'll have available funding that we want to program. Yeah, Jim.
Sorry if this was covered, but is this something where we would kind of reintroduce like a universe of tip projects where, yeah, it's a good project and went to the PRC. You still got a lot of design work to do to get 25% design, but would we start adding to the universe? And again, I don't know if this universe, if we've done away with it completely or if it's still kind of out there. But we always had this in the years past, this kind of universe of non-program projects, right? That oftentimes Matt pulls from when he starts putting forth projects for consideration, right? Is that an option?
Matt's going to have that universe. He's going to show
Gotcha.
us. He's going to show us everything. And then he's going to say, and here's that subset that meet, that 25% submittal requirement. He might even, based on conversations or information, he might even break it down into a couple different groups. I don't know, Matt, if how you're thinking about that. And he might even be able to say, and here's a group that's kind of, close, but not quite there yet.
Right. So we're still letting like projects come forward that we could park in the universe, new ones, right? Or no?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So that kind of a lot helps with that bar of
Yeah.
25%. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. So there would still be that big tip universe that you guys will actually see here in, a few weeks at the MPO level. And then we would still do the same, project scoring process for even, some projects that haven't reached the 25% submission, but are, ready to be scored. And so then basically the process would follow, what you all have already seen in recent years. But, when we get into those programming conversations in February and March, there'd be sort of like an above line and below line, like list of projects where it's like, okay, these have all reached our 25% submission threshold, and here are their scores. And then here's some ones that we're looking at, they're not quite at 25%, but here are their scores. And, it's still at the MPO's discretion to sort of pick from one group, other group, both. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So any members items? I'm not seeing any.
Do
Yellen?
we need to make a motion or we're all set?
No, I don't think
No.
so.
Okay,
I think, we sent it to the committee, and this was just an opportunity to kind of review and be
Gotcha.
aware of things. And Matt, when are we going to do another meet? Are we going to do another meeting, or is this committee done when we bring this to the board?
Yeah. So I think, as things stand today, this would be the last committee meeting unless the board decided, as a full board on November 4th that they wanted, some other further action to be taken. But, I think assuming that the board is comfortable with the recommendations going forward, then for now, this would be the last committee meeting. And then, I guess we could continue to explore that future committee question as we go.
I think that makes sense. Yeah. Great. Well, I just want to thank you all for your time over the summer and into the fall on this, and staff's time. I thought this was a really great process, and I think we've come out with a pretty good result at the end. So thank you all.
It's been a real pleasure. So yes, thank
Great.
you. Thank you, Eric.
Can I get just a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay,
Second.
so without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Take
Have
care.
fun, but we can't wait to go. Bye.